Hi, my name's Stuart Weems and welcome to the Investopoly podcast. My goal is to share easy to understand evidence-based holistic insights to help you master the game of building wealth. And welcome to the third in an 8-part series where I'm talking about how the evolution really from Investopoly to Wealth by Design. So what's changed over the last 8 years since I wrote Investopoly, and that's reflected in my new book, Wealth by Design, which would be available at the end of July, end of this month. So it's coming close. Anyway, today I'm talking about rule number 3, which is to automate a cash flow management plan. And as I've said many times, cash flow management is the cornerstone of any retirement strategy. It's not how much income you earn, it's really how much money you spend that makes the biggest difference. And I can assure you, I've met some very, very, very high income earners that really have little to show for it. And with respect to cash flow management, the misnomer, the misunderstanding is it's not discipline that is the problem. It's the fact that you're relying on discipline. That's the main issue with achieving better cash flow management. So automation, of course, is the answer. And having a regular investable surplus cash flow is really the fuel that feeds the engine to build wealth. Without the fuel, of course, you can't materialize wealth from no surplus cash flow at all. So it really is the fundamental aspect of being able to carve off a certain amount of income each year and contribute it towards your financial future and also your lifestyle goals as well. So it's not only just about building wealth, but talking to a client recently, they want to do some renovations to their house in the future. They want to send their kids to private schools. They need to be thinking about better cash flow management. So when those expenses arise, they've got confidence around the affordability. And the challenge these days is that most transactions, something like 97%, 98% of transactions are done electronically in Australia. The pain of paying, so the pain of actually handing across notes and coins to pay for something, that's more painful psychologically than tap and go. Also, one-click purchasing online, subscriptions, these sorts of things. Businesses have gone to great lengths to reduce the friction associated with paying, which just means it's a lot easier to spend money today than it's ever been in history. And so the reality is not more willpower. The reality is to automate your cash flow management so that it doesn't require you to sit back and measure every single dollar and cent. It doesn't require you to forego any sort of enjoyment in life, but it allows you a good balanced life while still prioritizing being able to achieve your financial and future lifestyle goals. And look, if I look back to Investopoly, when I wrote Investopoly and I spoke about rule number 3, which I termed spend less than you earn and invest the difference, I've certainly tightened it up. And I'm going to talk, as I said, talk about these 8 rules and how they've changed over the last 8 years since writing Investopoly. The first couple, they've really tightened up, but they haven't changed materially. There's a few rules as we get deeper into it that have changed substantially or materially really since Investopoly, and I think this is one of them. And whilst the change might not be, on the face of it seems significant, I think it is pretty fundamental. So I had a real basic principle back in when I wrote Investopoly. As I said, spend less than you earn, invest the difference. Always good advice. So the concept hasn't really changed. But what I talked about there is you can't manage what you don't measure. And so I said to people, just go and have a look at the last 3 months of expenditure, allocated into 7 categories. There was 3 non-discretionary categories like bills and commitments, these sorts of things, and then 4 discretionary categories because discretionary is really where you're going to kind of leak or overspend, and then that at least gives you a good sense of what your monthly, on average monthly discretionary and non-discretionary expenses are. And then in Investopoly, I said, well, then you can use that information to make some more deliberate expenses. So I guess it's really just about reviewing your discretionary spending and then deciding, how much each month would you like to spend. The problem back in 2017-18 when I wrote Investopoly is I kind of left it to chance, to discipline. Whereas, what I'm trying to do now is design a banking structure, an automation structure that allows you to put in place those guardrails to make sure that you don't have to rely on discipline or delayed gratification or these sorts of things in order to, build good cash flow management principles. And that's one of the major enhancements. Really, there's three major enhancements I think I've made with respect to this rule in wealth by design. So the first one is changing from really measurement to machine to really automation. So to fix the willpower problem is to actually remove the need for willpower. And so there's a few ways that you can do that. The first one is having a good banking structure. And I've spoken about this, over the last 8 years a couple of times, but separating non-discretionary and discretionary expenditure. And so you pay all your bills, utilities, school fees, loan repayments, insurances, all the sort of stuff that you really can't overspend from your offset account that's attached to your home loan. And then every week, fortnight or month, you transfer a fixed amount for discretionary expenses. So that's groceries, eating out, kids' activities, really anything that could be $1 this week and $100 the next week. That really signifies whether it's discretionary, whether you've got, it's up to your decisions and activities and so forth. And so what you do is, for example, put $5,000 a month into this discretionary expenditure account, and it allows you to sort of manage how you're going with discretionary expenditure during that month. So you know that if it's the 10th of the month and the account's almost down to zero, you've overspent, and it allows you to sort of work out, okay, what's gone wrong? What bad decisions have I made? Or is it just really random situation? Because of course, spending isn't perfectly straight line throughout the year. That can be a little bit lumpy at times, but allows you to sort of course correct during the month if you like. And also, one of the added benefits is that you unconsciously become more conscious about your spending. And that's really what you need to do. You want to be as conscious as possible about the spending decisions that you make. Now, that's difficult to do. You're not going to do it every, you're going to buy a takeaway coffee for whatever it costs, $4. I don't even know. But of course, you don't want to sit there and deliberate over that purchasing decision for 20 minutes. That's nonsense. But you do want to become more conscious about it. So that's certainly one way of automating cash flow management that doesn't require you to keep tracking and monitoring and feel like, you're under this cloud of having a sort of budget. The other way to automate is to make an investment decision and automate that investment decision. So, the most important thing isn't about what you're spending. It's really about what's left over. And then what are you going to do with that surplus investable cash flow? So for instance, if I decide, okay, my surplus is $2,000 a month, I'm going to invest it in an ETF portfolio. Well, make that decision once, automate it so it doesn't require willpower, constant emotional labor of making decisions each month. Okay, have I invested this month? Should I invest today? The market's a bit rocky. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow. And then, you got to log in, buy the ETFs, all those sorts of things. So the way that you could do that, for instance, is you could ask your employer, deposit a certain amount, deposit $1,000 a fortnight if your surplus $2,000 a month, $1,000 a fortnight into this BetaShares ETF account, BetaShares Direct, for example, and then you would have an automated transaction to pick that $1,000 up and invest it in a specific ETF or a number of ETFs. Whether you use BetaShares, Perla, there's a few really cost-effective online share brokers that allow you to automate some investment decisions. And then all you might do is kind of review the allocation every 6 months or every 3 months or every year, whatever it might be. But the point is, if you automate your cash flow management, you're more likely to stick to it. Doesn't require willpower, and the emotional labor of making decisions each and every month or each and every pay period, how should I invest these monies, just gives you a greater chance of making a mistake. And the mistake is delaying the decision, trying to time the market, knee-jerk reaction to what might be going on in the market. Ultimately, if you pick an ETF selection should be fundamentally sound. It should be value aware, which I'll talk about in a few weeks' time. And it really shouldn't change from week to week. The flavor and themes around ETF and portfolio construction can change from year to year, definitely, and maybe even sort of 6-month periods, but it won't change more often than that. So really, you should be able to identify, okay, which ETF do I want to invest in over the next 3 to 6 months and automate that process and feel quite confident about it. The other thing I think has evolved, or I know has evolved since Investopoly, is really about utility and enjoyment per dollar. So it's not just about trying to carve off every single cent and invest it for the future. It's really, building wealth and achieving financial security is more of a journey than a destination. And it requires I was having a conversation with a client about this only a couple of days yesterday, in fact. It requires a mindset shift. And I see it all the time with clients. For example, you get some people that are, really successful at building wealth, but they're not successful in spending that wealth. And it does require that mindset shift from, save hard, delay gratification, invest as much as possible. And that's great. And that can be successful. But then the challenge is then at what point then do I go, okay, I'm going to give myself permission to spend. And even more, I'm not going to invest anymore. I'm not going to put any more capital towards my financial future. I'm going to start spending all my income because I already have financial freedom. So you're better off to employ a more balanced approach from the get-go. And so I talk more about that in Wealth by Design. It's really about, well, I hope that over the next 20 years, I'm going to implement this investment strategy. And I hope by the end of that, my net worth is going to be $10 million, whatever it might be. That's great. But also I might get hit by a car tomorrow. So I need to enjoy today, and I need to enjoy today as much as possible, but not at the cost of compromising tomorrow or long-term future lifestyle goals. It really is a balance. And so paying for experiences, giving yourself the permission that if you have more surplus cash flow to go and spend it on, maybe an upgraded holiday or, whatever you're, looking to do that's going to improve your standard of living. But I think that nuance or that balance, better balance between having the discipline, automating that process and discipline, but then also giving yourself the permission that if the numbers turn out a little bit different, a little bit better than what you expected, then you should be able to spend that on your enjoyment and standard of living pretty much guilt-free. And look, on reflection, I think the third and final big change from Investopoly is really naming or highlighting the kind of biggest thief of wealth, and that's lifestyle creep or lifestyle inflation, however you want to put it. And, and I didn't really, I spoke about a little bit in Investopoly, but I really didn't name it and didn't really bring it to a fore. But it is a real problem. And, again, I guess, if I don't want to contradict myself, but, if you look back at my previous comment and say, well, you got to enjoy the journey. Well, if you worked really hard in your career, you worked really hard for a bonus or a promotion, of course you want to enjoy some of the fruits of that labor now rather than delay enjoying the fruits of that labor in 20 years' time. So you've got to have that balance. And I think planning and coming up with a long-term investment plan is sort of part of that process, which is, okay, how do I expect or how would I like my income to change and my surplus investable cash flow to change over the next 5, 10, 15 years? And then how will I change my allocation of that income capacity? So decide, in terms of you expect your income to increase, decide how much of that increase will go towards future investing and will go to lifestyle. Make that decision now. It'd be easier then to follow that direction or that previous decision rather than waiting for the income to increase and then deciding. Waiting for the income to increase and then deciding is fraught with danger, I should say, because you could end up making a mistake, and what ends up happening is people don't make a decision and the money just disappears because it will just disappear. There's no level of income. I don't care whether you're earning $20,200 or $2 million a year. There's no level of income where cash flow management no longer becomes important. I've got clients that earn several millions of dollars, and if they don't look after their money, it will just disappear irrespective of the amount. And just a little side note, the other thing I've changed since Investopoly is, sometimes it's easier to increase your income by $10,000 a year than reduce your expenses. So I think in Investopoly, I really focus on expense management, but, I think both require a little bit of focus, whether you might retrain or shift jobs or do something like that. So, to earn a little bit more income, can be a lot easier than trimming back expenses for some people. So I guess if we talk about some practical takeaways from this, it's really about automating your cash flow management as much as possible. So that could include both having a better banking structure or automating regular investing, without you needing to think about every pay period every month or even every few months. And, carving off a certain percentage of your income, whether it's 10, 20 or 30% of your income to invest for the future. And you do that for many, many years. The results are ridiculously surprising. Also try and fight lifestyle inflation. So think now about, where your income might be heading over the next few years and deliberately decide how you want to spend that money. If it feels like you don't have too much of a surplus, the comment I get regularly from clients is, I don't live an exuberant lifestyle, a hedonistic lifestyle. It's pretty conservative. We're not going out to really fancy restaurants all the time, but I feel like I've got no surplus cash flow. It's a really common situation. Well, there's an easy way to deal with it. In fact, next week, I'm going to share some more information around automation and also how Claude AI tool or ChatGPT, but we use Claude mainly for this process. I've got a prompt that I'm going to share with you to really help you analyze your cash flow and pull out some really meaningful data to help you make better decisions. And the reality is, for those people that go, oh, I'm not living a crazy lifestyle, but I've got no surplus cash flow. The reality is you're probably spending 20% or 30% too much in probably 10 different categories, in probably 50 to 100 different expenses. And so it's a difficult one to kind of navigate, like without that data insight. And Claude AI can really help in this regard. It's a real game changer. So next week I'm going to go through cash flow management episode. Anyway, that's a brief summary of how rule number 3 has changed from spend less than you earn and invest the difference to build a savings engine that runs on autopilot. Next Thursday, I'm going to talk about rule number 4. That's changed considerably as well. Grow your asset base first, then tilt towards liquidity and reduce gearing. Whereas incorrectly, I think rule number 4 in Investopoly was grow your asset base, then tilt towards income. So certainly changed rule number 4 quite a lot. Just as a reminder, books out end of July, 28 July, books get sent out. Pre-sales matter a lot. So if you're interested in buying the book, please pre-order it. The link is in the show notes. It will help me get copies into bookstores. And until next week, bye for now. Before I go, my new book, Wealth by Design, is now available for pre-order. Pre-orders matter more than you think. They're used by bookstores and online retailers to decide how many copies of the book to stock. So, as a huge favour to me, if you're considering buying the book, I'd really appreciate it if you pre-ordered it now rather than wait. And the part that I'm most excited about isn't really the book itself. It's the AI companion tool that I've built to go with it. I reckon it's a game changer, and I'd love you to see why. The pre-order links are in the show notes. Thanks a lot.